Welcome back. Okay, so let's talk about language and gender. We all use the same language, right? Men and women and everyone else in between or beyond or, gender flexible. We all use language differently. We all use language as a means of describing our lives. But they can be very, very different depending on who's using it. There are different imperatives when it comes to describing, let's say, men and women. How we communicate different concepts. Oftentimes, men might use sporting analogies to convey information. That was a Hail Mary, right? As a football term, right? Describing the fact that basically we just put it up there and it worked, right? We just threw the ball, and through grace and prayer, dude caught it in the end zone and we scored and won the game, right? That's a Hail Mary. And we use that term to describe some aspect of work or whatever, right? We might use basketball terms or, man, you hit it out of the park with that one, right? That's a baseball term. So men in American culture might use terminology that's oftentimes related to sports, and this is certainly not indicative of everyone because there are lots of people out there that don't care about sports. I'm just using this as an example. Women, on the other hand, might communicate very differently in different ways. It comes down to what is important to each group of people. Okay, men as decorators, right? Men might not know the difference between taupe and white, right? It's sort of the same, but it's not. Could be slightly, maybe a little bit more beigey. Is beigey a term? I don't know. I'm a guy, right? It's not something that has ever been important to me as a guy to learn about the different colors that might go along with decorating, right? I don't know. Because in American cultures, it hasn't necessarily been the job of the male to be concerned about that. Where women, on the other hand, this cultural imperative for being a homemaker, to being able to decorate and do all this other stuff, it became important. And again, this is just an example. I'm not saying all women are like this. What I'm saying is that there are these tropes. There are these stereotypes that come along with this. So they might use different terminology to describe what's going on in a given situation in a way that men might be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And the same might be said for using a sports analogy. I have no idea what you're talking about because this isn't something that I have ever had to deal with, even though we're speaking the same language, right? So we have to understand that, again, language can be very distinct based off of your gender or your age. In the United States, men have a tendency to use more aggressive terminology. When we're in a board meeting, right? A guy will get up there and he'll give a speech, be talking and be discussing and pointing things out, and kind of take over the room, right? Because that's their job. Is I have to be a guy, I have to be a man, and man is in control and in control of the conversation, control of the moment, right? And be relatively solo in that, where women oftentimes might consider doing talk about how things were figured out in a group, using supportive language, using teamwork rather than this aggressive, individualistic way of communicating that men often do. And this is indicative of how we communicate. Men oftentimes in American culture, this is not indicative of all men, have a tendency to, as we're listening to something, we will want to tell our own story because we're hearing something. We're like, oh, this reminds me of this one time when I did this, and I can't wait to tell this person as soon as they stop talking about this experience that I had. Instead of listening fully to the conversation, they come up with the next thing that they want to say. Women, on the other hand, have a tendency to do more listening and not so much thinking about what they're going to say next. And this is indicative of culture, right? These are different things that different ways of people communicating, and this is changed and adapted over the years from one generation to the next. It's constantly adapting to something new. If we were to go back, say 70 years ago, if we go back to the 1950s, and we go into the normal American household, things were very, very different than they are today. You had a head of the household, right? The man was in charge. There were different ideas about how women should speak to their man, right, to their husband, and how they should interact with their neighbors and all of this stuff. We have changed greatly over the years about how men and women should communicate, should talk to each other and talk to their friends, and so it's constantly adapting. But oftentimes there is a difference, whether that difference is carried on from a previous ideal that used to be held, or a set of norms that had been changed over time, or whether or not there's something else that's happened, right? So when we look at language and we look at, gender and race, which will come into this, all of these things are different and they have changed over time. But oftentimes there are differences in how we communicate. So if we look at this next concept of what is a dialect, okay? Basically, a dialect is sort of like a subgroup of a language. We see this here in the United States if we look at different geographical locations. For example, right, if we talk about, say, Colorado, okay, we'll use this as our initial example. We have a dialect here in Colorado, how we pronounce each individual word, how we use different types of terminology, is a dialect. Okay, we don't often think of it as a dialect because we use it all the time. It seems normal, and anyone else that speaks differently from us has a different dialect than what we do, which I always thought was pretty funny. But if we look at people, say, from Philadelphia or Boston or New York or Miami or Puerto Rico or Texas, right, where people have a slightly different way of speaking, right? A slightly different tone, a slightly different way of saying a specific word, which again means the same thing, but sounds just a little bit different than what we would normally say. This is this is what a dialect is. And dialects change over time, and this is happening in the United States at a fairly impressive time. In that, before we had globalization, before we had radio and television and movies, dialects around this country were probably way more stated than what they are today, like, or way more prominent. The reason why this is sort of changing, and where you can go to anywhere in the country and you can hear someone talking just like me, right? Because I'm probably speaking in a what we consider to be like a Midwestern dialect, which is oftentimes considered to be the American standard. What we consider to be the American standard. Didn't used to be the American standard, but it is now. Around the country, you can hear people that speak English almost exactly like I do. And that is a result of our media, right? We have our TV broadcasters and people that are on TV shows and are in movies, and they all sort of speak, in general, this sort of Midwestern accent. And because we learn through media, we pick up that accent. So, folks that might live in an area where there's a heavy accent that's different than this Midwestern, they're starting to disappear because they're becoming more and more reflective of this sort of media standard that's being put out there. So our language and our dialect is changing based on what we're watching and what we're using to be entertained with. So it's really interesting to see how dialect is adapting. Dialect can also be indicative to socioeconomic groups, to subcultures, to different racial differences. So all of these different things can be related together, oftentimes based on a geographical location. Not always, especially when we talk about different subcultures. One of the things that I found really interesting when I was doing my research is that with a lot of the graffiti writers that I was working with during my thesis, one of the things that I found is that a lot of them spoke very, very similarly, had the same terminology, the same way of talking and conveying information. And this terminology was spread throughout the country and eventually throughout the world through books and through movies and through documentaries and through Snapchat and through Facebook and all of this stuff. It all was adapted to graffiti writers. And so as a subculture, they have, in a sense, their own dialect, this own sort of cultural imperative with terminology and how it is being affected by graffiti and by their environment. So dialect doesn't necessarily have to be strictly geographically based, but it can be subcultural and refer to specific things that are imperative to that group or to that location. If we look at the United States, we have about 400 languages that are spoken in the United States. 169 of those are Native American, while the rest of them are brought over by different immigrants coming to the United States. 41 million speak Spanish as their first language. 38 million bringing in a distinct language, right? So of those 231 or 30, whatever that number is going to be, languages, right? 38 million people are speaking those languages, which is pretty wild, right? That's a huge part of our population. That's 10% of the American population that are speaking different languages. It's amazing. Like I said, the Midwestern variation is considered to be like the standard American English. And that's pretty much pushed by our news and media. So of the people that are living here, right, our immigrant families and our folks that have grown up, even first or second generation, that are living here in the United States, are picking up different dialects in the communities that they're living in. So, if you look at different parts of the country where there is a lot of immigration. So if you go to like Southern California or Texas or Chicago, New York, you're going to see a lot of immigrants coming in and adapting not only their language and picking up English, but combining them and working them together and creating a new dialect, a new adaptation. So all of these different ideas, all of these different languages coming together and creating new concepts, new cultural imperatives, is absolutely amazing as far as our culture is concerned, and how American culture is capable of adapting and engaging in all of these different languages, and what it brings to us, which is what I think is truly great about this country, is being able to bring in all of these different ideas and to not make it stale, right? Not allowing culture to just be one thing, but have it being engaged and contested and challenged, and I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great. There's going to be strife, yes, but overall, I think it's a great thing. One of the things that we also have to talk about is this concept of code switching. Code switching, oftentimes when used in like mass media, when you might hear about code switching in the news, it's usually associated with racism. And this is oftentimes true. This is when, if we're going to use a racist example, if you have like a white guy coming up to a black man and saying and calling that guy like, "Hey boy," right? "Hey boy," right? This is oftentimes code switching, because that terminology means something different in its context. So if this white guy had said, "Hey boy," to a white guy, right, it wouldn't have the same negative context as it would to someone of African American descent. And this is because of all the things that are associated with this terminology and with men that would use this as a means of control, of persecution. Hi, Bear. Good boy. So we've got this type of code switching that is done with racist intent. But code switching itself is not racist in general. Code switching, in fact, is done on a regular basis, almost on a daily basis, depending on who you're talking to. Code switching can be how you would talk to your grandmother, okay? How you are capable of discussing, right? And we've talked about this before, but like sort of like these norms of how we speak to each other in different situations. So I might code switch between how I would talk to my grandparents versus how I would talk to my friends, or how I might talk to this group of friends versus that group of friends, right? This group of friends, they're a bunch of gamers and weirdos, and they're, how I would talk to them would be totally different from how I would talk to my sports jocks and tough guys and whatever. You're going to speak to these people over here differently than how you're going to speak to these people over here. So understanding how we code switch, why it's important to understand the implications of that, and how people are going to do that in culture, right? We code switch when we're writing. Okay, so if I'm going to write a paper or if I'm going to write a letter, I'm not going to do it the same way that I actually speak, right? Because I can't convey the emotional information in my words as I speak, as you can interpret them. So you can tell if I'm excited, right? You can tell if I'm really depressed, if I'm sad. You can tell all of that through the tone of my voice. But if I'm writing something, I have to be descriptive in that writing. So we code switch into a different way of communicating through our writing or through our texting, right? How many times as a texter have you spent like you receive a message from somebody and you're like, man, I hate what you're saying, right? I think you're an idiot. But you respond to them, ha ha ha, LOL, right? Smiley face, thumbs up. And basically you're agreeing and yet you're lying, right? You might be conveying one set of information instead of something else, right? So how we communicate in this way, again, is code switching. We're able to change how we would respond or how we would tell somebody information based on the means of how we're communicating. So when we think about like code switching, we do it in all kinds of different ways. We do it in everyday practices that you might not even recognize as being code switching. But it's how we communicate. It's how we communicate to different groups of people. It's how we communicate within the classroom, right? If we were in a class right now and I'm standing in front of you and you guys are talking to me, there's a different relationship there, right? How you speak to me and how I speak to you. I'm not going to talk to you guys like I would talk to my best friend because I have a tendency to curse a lot, right? I'm not going to do that in front of you because I have something different to relate to you. I have some sort of information that is important. And if I do it, dropping F-bombs and stuff like that all the time, you're going to be like, man, this guy's kind of a joke, right? Might be kind of funny. And he could be like cool, right? I could be cool. But how we use that language is really important to understand. And that we oftentimes change how we speak depending on who it is that we're speaking to. And this is all related to our groups that we associate with. And it's dependent on gender, right? How you talk to women, if you're a man, can be code switching. How you talk to different people of different races or ethnicities can be code switching, whether it's good or whether it's bad. Different socioeconomic, right? How do you talk to someone that's poor, or how do you talk to somebody that's less educated, right? How do you use terminology? And this is a problem that we find in like medical anthropology, right? You have doctors and you have patients. Well, one of the things that needs to happen is that a lot of times doctors, when they communicate to their patients, they don't do a terribly good job of it, right? A lot of times they use a bunch of terminology that you don't understand, you don't get, because you're not a doctor. And they'll try and put things into place, but it doesn't always translate very well. So having someone be able to interpret that's why there's medical anthropologists out there that will help to do that interpretation. They also help to, investigate different types of medicine as well, but trying to figure out a way to communicate that information. And doctors aren't particularly necessarily good at code switching, right? One of the things that they are taught is to be able to give this information and to give all of it, even if you really have no idea what it is that they're saying. So that can be an issue. So understanding why code switching is super important to language, especially if you're going to be studying in a different culture, right? Not only just understanding how we code switch, but how does somebody else code switch? What are the implications of that? If you go to another community in another country and you're learning about that culture, and then all of a sudden you start to pick up how people are code switching when talking to different groups of people, all of a sudden you can figure out, like, where are these people located within the socioeconomic structure of the community. You can figure out what that education level is. You can figure out all kinds of different things based on how people change the way that they communicate. So by understanding all of this stuff, it's really, really important to do as we try and figure out how culture works and why language is so important to understanding all of this.